What happens when an entitled late-night host decides to ambush one of Hollywood's most respected legends? Well, you're about to find out exactly what went down when Clint Eastwood walked onto The Late Show with Stephen Colbert expecting a normal interview about his latest film, only to be blindsided by a host who seemed more interested in scoring political points than showing basic respect to his guest. Make sure to hit that subscribe button and let me know in the comments what you think about how this whole situation unfolded, because this story is going to leave you questioning everything you thought you knew about late-night television. It was supposed to be a routine promotional appearance. Clint Eastwood, the man who gave us Dirty Harry, The Good, The Bad, and The Ugly, and countless other cinematic masterpieces, was scheduled to appear on The Late Show to discuss his newest directorial effort. At 93 years old, Eastwood rarely does television interviews anymore, making this appearance something of a special event for fans and the show alike. The veteran actor and director had specifically requested that the conversation focus on his filmmaking process and the themes of his latest work, a request that Colbert's production team had readily agreed to during pre-interview negotiations. But from the moment Eastwood walked onto that stage, something felt off. Colbert's usual theatrical entrance seemed more aggressive than welcoming, and there was a noticeable tension in his demeanor that veteran talk show observers would later describe as unusual, even for someone known for his sometimes confrontational style. The audience, filled with fans eager to hear from the Hollywood legend, applauded enthusiastically as Eastwood made his way to the guest chair with the measured, confident stride that had become his trademark over decades in the spotlight. "Clint Eastwood, everybody," Colbert announced, his voice carrying an edge that seemed to cut through the studio atmosphere. "The man who's been making movies since before most of our viewers were born, and apparently still has some very strong opinions about how things should be done in this country." Eastwood settled into his chair, maintaining the composed demeanor that had served him well through countless interviews over the years. "Good to be here, Stephen," he replied simply, his gravelly voice carrying the same quiet authority that had made him a screen icon. "Now, I have to ask," Colbert continued, leaning forward with what appeared to be genuine curiosity but felt more like a predator sizing up prey. "Your new film deals with themes of justice and moral ambiguity. Do you think those themes might resonate with audiences who are dealing with what many consider to be a morally ambiguous political climate?" The question hung in the air like smoke from a gun barrel. Eastwood's expression remained neutral, but those who knew him well could detect the slight narrowing of his eyes that suggested he was already sensing where this conversation might be headed. "Well, Stephen, I think good stories have always dealt with questions of right and wrong. That's what makes them universal. People have been grappling with these themes long before any of us were here, and they'll be grappling with them long after we're gone." Colbert nodded, but his smile seemed forced, artificial. Right. Universal themes. But surely you must have some thoughts about how these universal themes might apply to our current political landscape? I mean, you've never been shy about your political views in the past." There it was, the first real probe, disguised as casual conversation but clearly designed to steer the discussion away from Eastwood's film and toward more controversial territory. The veteran actor shifted slightly in his chair, a movement so subtle that most viewers wouldn't notice it, but it spoke volumes about his growing discomfort with the direction of the interview. "I'm here to talk about the movie, Stephen," Eastwood said, his voice carrying a warning that anyone familiar with his screen persona would recognize. "It's a story about people making difficult choices under pressure. I think audiences will connect with that regardless of their political affiliations." But Colbert wasn't backing down. If anything, Eastwood's attempt to redirect the conversation seemed to embolden him. "Oh, come on, Clint. You can't tell me that someone who's lived through as much American history as you have doesn't have opinions about what's happening in our country right now. Your characters have always stood for something. What do you stand for?" The question was loaded, designed to put Eastwood in an impossible position. Answer it, and he'd be drawn into exactly the kind of political debate he'd come here to avoid. Refuse to answer, and he'd appear evasive to the audience. It was a classic ambush tactic, the kind of journalistic gotcha moment that had become all too common in modern media, but it was particularly egregious given the circumstances of this supposedly promotional interview. Eastwood's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "I stand for good storytelling, Stephen. I stand for treating people with respect. I stand for keeping my word when I agree to come on someone's show to discuss my work." The emphasis on those last words was unmistakable, and for a moment, Colbert seemed to realize he might have overplayed his hand. But instead of backing down or acknowledging the implicit criticism, he doubled down with a laugh that sounded more nervous than genuinely amused. Well, that's very diplomatic of you, Clint. But diplomacy isn't exactly what your characters are known for, is it? I mean, Dirty Harry wasn't exactly worried about hurt feelings when he was cleaning up the streets of San Francisco. The comparison was deliberately inflammatory, an attempt to use Eastwood's most famous character against him in a way that felt both cheap and disrespectful. It was the kind of move that demonstrated either a complete misunderstanding of the difference between an actor and his roles, or a calculated decision to ignore that difference for the sake of creating controversy. Eastwood's response was measured but firm. Harry Callahan was a character in a movie, Stephen. He wasn't real. What's real is that I'm sitting here as a guest on your show, and I'd appreciate it if we could have a conversation that honors the agreement we made about what we'd be discussing. The directness of the statement seemed to catch Colbert off guard. For a moment, the host's carefully constructed persona slipped, revealing something uglier underneath. Oh, I see. So when it's convenient for you, you're just an actor playing a role. But when you're endorsing political candidates or making statements about American values, suddenly you're speaking as Clint Eastwood the citizen. Which is it? The accusation hung in the air like a challenge, and the audience seemed to sense that something had shifted in the dynamic of the interview. This wasn't the playful banter they'd expected from a promotional appearance. It was something more personal, more confrontational. Eastwood's expression hardened, and when he spoke again, his voice carried the quiet menace that had made him legendary on screen. I think you've confused me with someone else, Stephen. I've always been clear about when I'm speaking as an actor and when I'm speaking as a private citizen. What I won't do is let you twist my words or my presence here into something it's not. The gauntlet had been thrown down. Two men, both icons in their respective fields, were now locked in a battle of wills that neither seemed prepared to lose. The audience watched in fascination and growing discomfort as their beloved late-night entertainment transformed into something much more serious and potentially explosive. Colbert's next move revealed just how far he was willing to push this confrontation. Instead of acknowledging Eastwood's legitimate concerns about the direction of the interview, he chose to escalate further, his voice taking on a mocking tone that would have been inappropriate for any guest, let alone someone of Eastwood's stature and age. Oh, so now you're the victim here, Clint? The big tough guy who made a career out of playing characters who shoot first and ask questions later is suddenly concerned about being treated unfairly? That's rich, coming from someone who spent decades glorifying violence on screen. The attack was personal, unprofessional, and completely out of line. Eastwood's films had always been complex explorations of morality and justice, not simple glorifications of violence, and anyone with even a basic understanding of cinema would know that. But Colbert wasn't interested in nuance or accuracy. He was interested in scoring points and creating a viral moment, regardless of the cost to his guest's dignity or reputation. Eastwood's response was immediate and cutting. You know what, Stephen? I think you've got me confused with someone who's interested in playing your little game. I came here to talk about my work, not to be lectured by someone who's never created anything more substantial than a punchline. The insult hit its mark, and Colbert's mask of jovial hostility slipped even further. A punchline? Is that what you think this is? This show has won multiple Emmy Awards, and I've been doing this for over a decade. I think I know how to conduct an interview. Then maybe you should try conducting one instead of whatever this is, Eastwood shot back, his voice rising slightly for the first time since the interview began. I've been doing interviews since before you were born, son, and I've never seen anything this unprofessional. The word son was delivered with such dismissive authority that it seemed to physically stagger Colbert. Here was a man who was used to being the one in control, the one asking the questions and setting the tone, suddenly being dressed down by someone who radiated the kind of quiet power that couldn't be manufactured or performed. Unprofessional? Colbert sputtered, his composure cracking visibly. You want to talk about unprofessional? How about the time you talked to an empty chair at a political convention? How about your comments about entire generations of Americans? You want to lecture me about professionalism? The references were calculated to wound, designed to dredge up past controversies and use them as weapons. But Eastwood had faced far worse criticism over his long career, and he wasn't about to be rattled by a talk show host having what appeared to be a public meltdown. I see what this is about now, Eastwood said, his voice returning to its earlier calm but somehow becoming more menacing in the process. You didn't invite me here to talk about my movie. You invited me here to try to embarrass me, to try to make yourself look clever at my expense. Well, congratulations, Stephen. You've succeeded in showing everyone exactly what kind of person you are. The accusation hung in the air like a death sentence. Colbert's face flushed red as he realized that his ambush had backfired spectacularly. Instead of making Eastwood look bad, he'd revealed his own pettiness and lack of professionalism to a national audience. That wasn't the intention, Colbert stammered, suddenly seeming to realize how badly he'd misjudged the situation. I just think it's important to ask tough questions, to challenge our guests to think about the bigger picture. Tough questions? Eastwood repeated, his tone suggesting he found the phrase amusing. Stephen, I've been asked tough questions by some of the best journalists in the world. What you're doing isn't journalism, it's ambush entertainment. There's a difference, and the fact that you can't see it says everything anyone needs to know about you. The distinction was devastating in its clarity. Eastwood had just articulated what many viewers were thinking but couldn't quite put into words. This wasn't an interview. It was a performance, and not a particularly good one at that. Colbert was treating his guest like a prop in his own personal political theater, and it was uncomfortable to watch. Look, maybe we got off on the wrong foot here, Colbert said, attempting to salvage the situation. Why don't we start over? Tell me about your new film. What inspired you to make it? But it was too late. Eastwood had seen enough of Colbert's true character to know that any attempt at normal conversation would be futile. You know what inspired me to make it, Stephen? The same thing that's inspired all my films, respect for the audience's intelligence, something that seems to be in short supply around here. The camera captured the moment perfectly, as Eastwood's words landed like a physical blow. Colbert's attempt at recovery had failed miserably, and now he was faced with the reality that he'd alienated one of Hollywood's most respected figures on national television. I don't think that's fair, Colbert protested weakly. I respect the audience. That's why I ask the questions that matter. That's why I try to dig deeper than just surface-level promotional material. If you respected the audience, you'd honor your agreements with your guests, Eastwood replied coldly. If you respected the audience, you'd give them the interview they tuned in to see, not whatever personal vendetta you're working through. If you respected the audience, you'd show some basic human decency to a guest who's old enough to be your father. The age reference was particularly cutting, highlighting not just the disrespect inherent in Colbert's behavior, but the generational divide between someone who'd earned his reputation through decades of hard work and someone who seemed to think that having a television show gave him the right to treat anyone however he pleased. Colbert's response revealed just how deep his sense of entitlement ran. Age doesn't give you a free pass from being questioned about your views and your impact on American culture. If anything, it makes those questions more important, not less. And being on television doesn't give you the right to ambush people who've agreed to appear on your show in good faith, Eastwood countered. You want to debate politics? Run for office. You want to change American culture? Make something that matters. But don't use your platform to attack guests who can't defend themselves on equal terms. The inequality of the situation was stark and undeniable. Colbert had every advantage. It was his show, his audience, his cameras, his edit. Eastwood was essentially defenseless against this kind of attack, which made Colbert's behavior all the more reprehensible. I'm not attacking anyone, Colbert said, but his voice lacked conviction. I'm just asking questions. No, Stephen, you're not asking questions, Eastwood said, his voice carrying the weight of finality. You're making accusations disguised as questions. You're trying to create controversy where none exists. You're treating me like a character in one of your comedy bits instead of like a human being who deserves basic respect. The moment of truth had arrived. Colbert had been called out, completely and thoroughly, and he had no response that could salvage his dignity or his position. The audience sat in stunned silence, watching their beloved late-night host being systematically dismantled by a man who understood the difference between entertainment and exploitation. In that silence, something shifted in Colbert's demeanor. Perhaps it was the realization that he'd gone too far, or perhaps it was simply the panic of someone who'd lost control of his own show. Either way, his next words would prove to be the final straw that broke whatever remained of this professional relationship. You know what, Clint? Maybe the problem isn't with my questions. Maybe the problem is with someone who can't handle being challenged after decades of people telling them what they want to hear. Maybe the problem is with someone who thinks their age and their legacy make them untouchable. The words were venomous, delivered with a spite that seemed to surprise even Colbert himself. He'd crossed a line that couldn't be uncrossed, transforming what had been an unprofessional interview into a personal attack that revealed the ugliest aspects of his character. Eastwood's response was immediate and devastating. And maybe the problem is with someone who thinks having a television show makes them important enough to treat their guests like garbage. You want to know what I think about American culture, Stephen? I think it's been poisoned by people like you who mistake cruelty for cleverness and think that tearing others down somehow builds them up. The accusation hit like a lightning bolt. Eastwood had just articulated what millions of viewers felt but couldn't express, the sense that something fundamental had been lost in the culture, that basic decency and respect had been sacrificed on the altar of entertainment and political point scoring. I don't think I'm the one being cruel here. Colbert shot back, but his voice betrayed his uncertainty. I'm just trying to have an honest conversation about important issues. Honest? Eastwood laughed, but there was no humor in it. Stephen, there's nothing honest about what you're doing. You agreed to one thing and delivered another. You promised a promotional interview and delivered an ambush. You're not interested in honest conversation. You're interested in creating content for your show, and you don't care who you hurt in the process. The truth of the statement was undeniable. Colbert had indeed violated the basic trust that exists between host and guest, the unspoken agreement that both parties will honor the terms under which the interview was arranged. In breaking that trust, he'd revealed something fundamental about his character that no amount of comedy or charm could disguise. Look, if you're not comfortable with the questions, we can move on, Colbert said, attempting one final time to regain control of the situation. But I'm not going to apologize for doing my job. Your job? Eastwood repeated, his voice filled with disbelief. Your job is to entertain people, Stephen. Your job is to make them laugh, to give them a break from the problems of the day. Your job is not to attack your guests or to use your platform to settle personal scores. The distinction was crucial. Colbert had forgotten the fundamental purpose of his role, the responsibility that comes with being welcomed into millions of homes every night. He'd mistaken the privilege of his position for a license to behave however he pleased, and now he was being held accountable for that mistake. I think you're being a little dramatic, Colbert said, his tone now defensive and petulant. This is just a conversation. People have disagreements all the time. No, Stephen, this isn't a conversation, Eastwood replied, his voice carrying a finality that suggested the end was near. A conversation requires two people who respect each other enough to listen. What you're doing is performing, and I'm not interested in being a prop in your performance. With that, Eastwood began to remove his microphone. The gesture was simple but powerful, a clear signal that he was done participating in whatever this had become. The audience watched in stunned silence as one of Hollywood's most legendary figures prepared to walk away from a national television appearance. Wait, where are you going? Colbert asked, panic creeping into his voice as he realized the full magnitude of what was happening. We're not finished here. Yes, we are, Eastwood said simply, standing up from his chair with the same dignity he'd maintained throughout the entire ordeal. I came here to talk about my work, to share something I care about with people who might appreciate it. But you've made it clear that's not what you're interested in. The camera captured every moment as Eastwood prepared to leave, his movements deliberate and controlled. This wasn't a tantrum or an emotional outburst. It was a calculated decision by someone who had reached the end of his tolerance for unprofessional behavior. You can't just leave, Colbert protested, his voice rising as he realized the disaster unfolding before him. We have a show to finish. We have an audience. Then maybe you should have thought about that before you decided to ambush me, Eastwood replied, his voice carrying the weight of decades of experience dealing with difficult people in difficult situations. The audience deserves better than this, Stephen. They deserve honesty, they deserve respect, and they deserve entertainment that doesn't come at the expense of basic human decency. The words hung in the air like a judgment, and for a moment, Colbert seemed to understand the full impact of what he'd done. But instead of apologizing or attempting to make amends, he chose to double down one final time. You know what? Fine. Walk away. That's what your generation does, isn't it? When things get tough, when people start asking the hard questions, you just walk away and pretend it's everyone else's fault. The final insult was too much. Eastwood turned back toward Colbert, his eyes blazing with a controlled fury that was far more intimidating than any outburst could have been. My generation built this country, Stephen. We fought wars, we raised families, we created art that actually meant something. What have you done besides tear down better people than yourself? The question hung in the air like a death sentence. Colbert had no answer because there was no answer. He'd been exposed completely, revealed as someone who had mistaken privilege for achievement and platform for purpose. "I think we're done here," Eastwood said, his voice returning to its earlier calm. "Good luck with your show, Stephen. I hope you figure out what you're actually trying to accomplish with it." With that, Clint Eastwood walked off the Late Show stage, leaving behind a host who had just learned the hard way that some people can't be bullied, can't be manipulated, and won't compromise their dignity for anyone's entertainment. The audience sat in stunned silence, having witnessed something unprecedented in the normally controlled world of late-night television. Colbert was left alone on his stage, facing an audience that had just watched him systematically destroy his own credibility and reputation. The man who had started the interview thinking he could score easy points off a Hollywood legend had instead revealed himself to be everything wrong with modern media culture. So what do you think? Did Colbert cross the line with his treatment of Eastwood? Or was he just doing his job as a talk show host? Let me know in the comments below. And don't forget to subscribe for more stories about the moments when entertainment industry egos collide and the truth comes out.